Captain Marcus Chun stared at the vast emptiness of space through the reinforced viewport of his cargo ship, the Wandering Star. 27 years he had been flying the trade routes between Earth colonies and alien worlds. 27 years of dodging pirates, negotiating with strange creatures, and hauling everything from medical supplies to exotic minerals across the galaxy. His weathered hands gripped the coffee cup that had become his constant companion during these long journeys. The ship hummed quietly around him, its engines purring with the steady rhythm he had grown to love. Every bolt, every circuit, every scratched panel told a story of adventure and survival. The Wandering Star was not the fastest ship in the fleet, nor the prettiest, but she was reliable. More importantly, she was home. Marcus had planned this to be his final run. The cargo bay was filled with rare crystals from the mining colonies of Kepler, 442b, worth enough to secure a comfortable retirement back on Earth. He could already imagine the small farm he would buy in the countryside, far from the noise of spaceports and the endless hum of ship engines. Maybe he would grow tomatoes. His grandmother had grown the best tomatoes in their old neighborhood. The navigation computer chimed softly, indicating they were approaching the Zirian system. Marcus leaned forward and checked the displays. Everything looked normal. The star charts showed clear passage to the main trade station where he would sell his cargo and book passage back to Earth. After that, someone else could take over the Wandering Star. She deserved a captain who still had the fire for adventure burning in their chest. As the ship dropped out of hyperspace, Marcus expected to see the familiar sight of Zirian Prime's massive space station orbiting the system's fourth planet. Instead, his viewport was filled with the chaotic scene of a battle in progress. Sleek warships, painted in deep crimson, darted between larger vessels that glowed with an inner light. Explosions bloomed like deadly flowers against the star field. "One of the seven hells is going on out there," Marcus muttered, his hands flying over the controls. The Wandering Star's sensors painted a grim picture on his screens. The attacking ships bore the insignia of the Draconian Empire, while the defending vessels belonged to the Galactic Trade Federation. This was more than a simple raid. This was an invasion. Marcus had dealt with Draconians before. They were a proud species that resembled the dragons of Earth legend, with scales that shimmered like metal and eyes that burned with inner fire. Most were reasonable traders, if a bit arrogant. But these ships belonged to the military wing of their empire, and military Draconians played by different rules entirely. The communications array crackled to life. "Attention, all civilian vessels," came a voice speaking Galactic Standard with a heavy accent. "You will submit to inspection. Any ship attempting to flee will be destroyed. Comply immediately." Marcus cursed under his breath. He could try to run, but the Wandering Star was a cargo hauler, not a racing ship. The Draconian interceptors would catch him before he could reach the hyperspace jump point. He could try to hide among the asteroids that dotted this system, but that would only delay the inevitable. There was no choice but to comply and hope they would let a harmless trader continue on his way. "This is Captain Marcus Chun of the independent cargo vessel Wandering Star," he broadcast on the standard frequency. "I am carrying trade goods and have no military affiliation. Requesting safe passage." The response came quickly. "Captain Chun, you will proceed to Docking Bay 7 aboard the battleship Iron Talon. Any deviation from the prescribed course will result in immediate destruction." Marcus sighed and plotted a course toward the massive Draconian vessel. The Iron Talon was a sight to behold, its hull covered in scales that seemed to shift and move in the light of Zirian's sun. Weapon ports bristled along its sides like the spines of some cosmic predator. As the Wandering Star approached the docking bay, Marcus could see smaller fighters launching from hidden hangars, spreading out to secure the system. The docking process was smooth, handled by automated systems that guided his ship into the bay with mechanical precision. As soon as the Wandering Star settled onto the deck, magnetic clamps engaged with a series of loud clanks that reverberated through the hull. Marcus shut down the engines and checked his personal sidearm. It would be useless against Draconian scales, but it made him feel slightly better. The airlock cycled open, and Marcus found himself face to face with a squad of Draconian soldiers. They were magnificent and terrifying in equal measure, standing nearly 8 feet tall in their battle armor. Their scales ranged from deep emerald to bronze, and their eyes glowed with an inner light that seemed to see right through him. Captain Chun, the squad leader, spoke, his voice carrying the authority of command. I am Commander Vorik. You will accompany us for questioning. Marcus had no choice but to follow. The corridors of the Iron Talon were designed for beings much larger than humans, with high ceilings and wide passages. The walls were decorated with intricate carvings that seemed to tell the story of ancient battles and victories. Everything about the ship spoke of power and pride. They entered a large chamber that appeared to serve as both a briefing room and a throne room. At the far end, seated on a raised platform, was the most impressive Draconian Marcus had ever seen. His scales were deep gold with streaks of crimson, and when he moved, they caught the light like polished metal. This had to be someone of high rank. Captain Chun, the golden Draconian, spoke, his voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. I am Admiral Skaroth of the 3rd Expansion Fleet. Your cargo manifest indicates you are carrying crystalline deposits from the Kepler colonies. These materials are now required for the war effort. Marcus felt his retirement slipping away like sand through his fingers. Admiral, those crystals are legally purchased cargo. I have all the proper documentation. Admiral Scarith's laugh was like the sound of breaking glass. Human laws mean nothing in territory that now belongs to the Draconian Empire. However, I am not entirely unreasonable. You will be compensated for your cargo at the standard military requisition rate. Marcus knew without asking that the military rate would be a fraction of what the crystals were worth on the open market. But arguing with an admiral surrounded by armed soldiers seemed like a poor career choice, especially since he had been planning to retire anyway. I understand, Admiral, Marcus replied, keeping his voice steady. What about my ship and crew? Your ship will be returned to you once the cargo transfer is complete. As for your crew, the Admiral paused, consulting a datapad. You're listed as operating alone. Impressive for a human. I've been flying solo for 15 years, Marcus said. Easier to split the profits that way. Admiral Skaroth nodded approvingly. Practical. I respect that. Commander Vorik will oversee the transfer of your cargo. You will remain aboard the Iron Talon until the process is complete. As Marcus was escorted to temporary quarters, he tried to calculate how much money he would lose in this transaction. The numbers were not encouraging. The military compensation might cover his ship's operating expenses and leave him enough for a small apartment on some frontier world, but the comfortable retirement he had planned was now impossible. His quarters were surprisingly spacious by human standards, though probably cramped for a Draconian. There was a bed, a desk, and a small viewport that looked out into the cargo bay, where teams of workers were transferring his precious crystals to Draconian storage containers. Each container that left his ship took a piece of his future with it. Hours passed slowly. Marcus tried to sleep, but found himself staring at the ceiling, thinking about what he would do next. He could take whatever job he could find and try to rebuild his savings, but at his age, that would take decades. He could sell the Wandering Star and use the money to buy a small business somewhere, but the idea of being planet-bound for the rest of his life held no appeal. A soft chime indicated someone was at his door. Marcus opened it to find a young Draconian female standing in the corridor. She was different from the soldiers he had seen earlier. Her scales were a beautiful silver-blue color that seemed to shimmer with their own light, and she wore robes instead of armor. Most striking were her eyes, which held an intelligence and sadness that seemed far older than her apparent years. Captain Chun, she spoke in perfect galactic standard, her voice musical and clear. I'm Princess Zura of the 3rd Royal House. May I enter? Marcus stepped aside, his mind racing. A princess? What could royalty possibly want with a cargo hauler? Of course, Your Highness. Please sit down. Princess Zara moved with a grace that made Marcus think of flowing water. She seated herself at the small desk and fixed him with those remarkable eyes. I have a proposition for you, Captain. One that could be mutually beneficial. I'm listening, Marcus said, taking the chair across from her. I need passage away from this fleet, she said simply. And you need compensation for your losses. I can provide both. Marcus leaned back, studying her face. There was desperation there, carefully hidden, but unmistakable to someone who had spent years reading the emotions of potential business partners. Why would a princess need to sneak away from her own fleet? Zara was quiet for a long moment, and Marcus could see her weighing how much truth to reveal. This war was not supposed to happen, Captain. My father, the Emperor, sent this fleet on what was supposed to be a diplomatic mission. Admiral Skaroth has exceeded his authority. And you want to get word back to the Emperor? Among other things, yes. Zara stood and moved to the viewport, looking out at the ongoing transfer operations. I can pay you 10 times what your cargo is worth, Captain Chun. All I ask is safe passage to neutral space where I can contact my father directly. Marcus felt his heart rate increase. 10 times the cargo value would not only secure his retirement, but make him wealthy beyond his modest dreams. But taking a runaway princess aboard his ship would also make him a target for every draconian warship in the galaxy. Your Highness, he said carefully, what you're suggesting sounds like kidnapping to Admiral Skaroth. He would hunt us across the galaxy. Only if he knew I was aboard your ship, Zara replied, turning back to face him. I have ways of avoiding detection, at least temporarily. And once we reach neutral space and I contact my father, Skaroth will have much larger problems to worry about than one human captain. Marcus studied her face, looking for signs of deception. All he saw was determination and a quiet desperation that reminded him of caged animals he had seen as a child. Whatever was happening on the ship, Princess Zara clearly wanted no part of it. How do I know you can actually pay what you're promising? He asked. Without a word, Zara reached into her robes and withdrew a small crystalline device. She activated it, and a holographic display appeared showing a financial account with more digits than Marcus had ever seen in one place. The account was registered with the Central Galactic Bank and showed a current balance that made his head spin. Half now, half when we reach neutral space, she said, deactivating the device. Marcus stared at the spot where the hologram had been, his mind reeling. This much money would change everything. He could retire in luxury, buy a ship 10 times better than the Wandering Star, or even purchase his own small trading station. But the risks were enormous. If they were caught, Admiral Skaroth would probably space them both. Why me? He asked finally. There must be other options. Zara smiled, and for the first time, Marcus saw warmth in those ancient eyes. Because, Captain Chun, you have a reputation. In 27 years of trading, you have never broken a contract or betrayed a client's trust. That kind of integrity is rare in any species. Marcus felt a flush of pride. He had worked hard to build that reputation, sometimes at great personal cost. But he had never imagined it would lead to something like this. How will we even get off this ship, he asked. Security must be tight. Leave that to me, Zara said. I just need to know if you're willing to take the risk. Marcus stood and walked to the viewport, watching as the last of his crystals were loaded into draconian storage containers. His old life was already gone. Admiral Skaroth had seen to that when he seized the cargo. The question now was whether he had the courage to reach for something better, even if it meant risking everything. He thought about the small farm he had planned to buy, the quiet retirement among growing things. That dream was dead now, but maybe, just maybe, a new dream was being born, one that involved more money than he had ever imagined, and an adventure that would cap off his career in style. Marcus turned back to face the princess. Her expression was carefully neutral, but he could see the hope hidden in her eyes. She needed him as much as he needed her, perhaps more. Your Highness, he said slowly, I accept your proposition. The smile that crossed Zara's face was like sunrise after a long night. Thank you, Captain. You will not regret this decision. As she moved toward the door, Marcus called out, Princess Zara? What exactly did Admiral Skaroth do that exceeded his authority? She paused with her hand on the door control, her expression growing dark. He ordered the destruction of 3 civilian colonies that refused to surrender immediately. 15 million innocent beings died because they asked for time to consider their surrender. My father would never have approved such actions. The door closed behind her, leaving Marcus alone with the magnitude of what he had just agreed to do. He was no longer just helping a runaway princess escape an unwanted situation. He was potentially helping to stop a war criminal from committing further atrocities. Marcus looked out at the cargo bay one more time, then began planning how to prepare the Wandering Star for the most dangerous journey of his career. His retirement would have to wait a little longer, but if Princess Zara was right, it would be worth the delay. Outside his quarters, the great warship continued its work of conquest, unaware that the seeds of its admiral's downfall were already being planted in the mind of one determined human captain who had thought his adventuring days were over. The stars waited beyond the viewport, vast and full of possibilities that Marcus Chun was only beginning to imagine. The next 6 hours passed like the longest day of Marcus's life. He tried to appear calm and cooperative as Draconian engineers finished cataloging his ship systems, but inside his mind was racing with plans and contingencies. Every time a guard walked past his quarters, he wondered if they had discovered Princess Zara's escape plan. Every announcement over the ship's communication system made him tense with anticipation. Commander Vorik arrived precisely at the appointed time to escort Marcus back to his ship. The Draconian officer seemed to be in a better mood than before, probably pleased that the cargo transfer had gone smoothly without any human complications. "Your crystals will serve the Empire well," Vorik said as they walked through the corridors. "Admiral Skaroth has authorized payment at standard military rates. The credits have been transferred to your account." Marcus checked his personal communicator and saw the deposit. It was exactly as pathetic as he had expected, barely enough to cover his operating expenses for the next few months. He forced a smile and nodded. "The Empire is generous." Vorik's laugh sounded like grinding metal. "Indeed. You're fortunate that the Admiral chose not to simply confiscate your cargo entirely. Other commanders might not have been so reasonable." They reached the docking bay, where the Wandering Star sat exactly as Marcus had left her. The familiar sight of his ship's worn but reliable hull filled him with a mixture of relief and anxiety. Relief because she looked undamaged. Anxiety because he was about to use her in the most dangerous gamble of his life. "Your ship has been cleared for departure," Vorik announced. "You have 1 hour to clear the system before the Admiral imposes a general quarantine. I suggest you use that time wisely." Marcus shook hands with the commander, noting how carefully the Draconian controlled his strength to avoid crushing human bones. "Thank you for your courtesy, Commander. It's been an educational experience." As soon as Vorik and his soldiers left the docking bay, Marcus hurried aboard his ship and began the startup sequence. Everything appeared normal on the surface, but he noticed several new components that had not been there before. The Draconians had installed tracking devices and probably listening equipment as well. He had expected as much. The Wandering Star's engines came online with their familiar rumble. Marcus ran through his pre-flight checklist twice, partly from habit and partly to calm his nerves. Where was Princess Zara? She had said she would handle getting off the battleship, but so far there was no sign of her. 20 minutes into his preparations, Marcus heard a soft thump from the cargo bay. He activated the internal cameras and scanned the now empty space where his crystals had been stored. At first he saw nothing, then movement caught his eye. A maintenance panel near the floor was sliding open, and a slender figure emerged from what appeared to be an impossibly small hiding space. Marcus stared at his monitor in amazement. Princess Zara had somehow compressed herself into a space that should have been far too small for any creature her size. As he watched, her body seemed to expand back to its normal proportions, like a folding sculpture returning to its intended shape. Whatever abilities the Draconian royal family possessed, they were clearly beyond normal understanding. Princess Zara looked directly at one of the cameras and gave a small wave. Marcus activated the intercom system. "Your Highness, how did you manage to get aboard?" Her voice came back clear and calm. "Royal family trade secrets, Captain. We should depart immediately. My absence will be discovered soon." Marcus needed no further encouragement. He activated the ship's communication system and requested clearance to depart. The response came back immediately, and the magnetic clamps released with a series of metallic clanks. The Wandering Star lifted off the deck and moved slowly toward the bay exit. As they emerged into open space, Marcus got his first clear look at the aftermath of the battle. Debris from destroyed Federation ships drifted among the asteroids, and rescue pods blinked with emergency beacons. The Draconian fleet had arranged itself in a defensive perimeter around Zirian Prime, clearly intending to establish permanent control of the system. "Captain," came Princess Zara's voice over the intercom, "I recommend we set course for the neutral zone at maximum sustainable speed. And I should warn you that we are being followed." Marcus checked his sensors and saw what she meant. 2 Draconian interceptors had launched from the Iron Talon and were maintaining a discreet distance behind them. They were not trying to hide their presence, but they were not moving to intercept either. Probably standard procedure for any ship that had been in contact with high-value cargo. "How long do you think they'll follow us?" Marcus asked. "Until we leave the system, assuming they do not receive orders to stop us before then. Once we enter hyperspace, we will be much harder to track." Marcus plotted a course for the system's edge where they could safely jump to hyperspace. At the wandering star's maximum speed, it would take them nearly 3 hours to reach the jump point. 3 hours was a long time for Admiral Skaroth to discover that his princess was missing. As they accelerated away from the Draconian fleet, Marcus activated the ship's internal cleaning protocols. The devices the Draconians had planted would be detected and neutralized by systems he had installed years ago specifically for this purpose. Life as an independent trader often meant carrying cargo that various governments prefer to track, so electronic countermeasures were a necessary investment. 2 hours into their flight, Princess Zara appeared on the bridge. She moved with that same fluid grace Marcus had noticed before, and, now that he saw her in good light, he was struck by how beautiful she was. Her silver-blue scales caught the light from the ship's displays, creating patterns that were almost hypnotic to watch. "Your ship is more sophisticated than it appears," she observed, taking the co-pilot seat. "The countermeasure systems are quite advanced. A trader learns to be prepared for many situations," Marcus replied. "Though I have to admit, this situation is unprecedented." Zara smiled, and Marcus noticed that her teeth were not the razor-sharp fangs he had expected, but more similar to human teeth except for slightly pronounced canines. "You are handling it well. Most humans would be terrified to have a Draconian aboard their ship." "Should I be terrified?" Marcus asked. "That depends on whether you intend to keep your word," Zara replied, but her tone was light and almost teasing. They sat in comfortable silence for several minutes, watching the stars while slowly past the viewports. Marcus found himself stealing glances at his passenger, fascinated by the way her scales seemed to shift color slightly, depending on her mood or the light. When she was calm, they were a soft silver blue. When she was thinking hard, they took on a more metallic sheen. "Captain," Zara said suddenly, "may I ask you a personal question?" "Sure. Why did you agree to help me?" "The risk is enormous, and you do not know me well enough to trust my word about payment." Marcus considered the question carefully. It was something he had been asking himself since the moment he agreed to her proposition. "I suppose it comes down to choices," he said finally. "Admiral Skaroth took away my choice when he seized my cargo. You're offering me a new choice, one that could lead to something better than I had planned." And he paused, trying to find the right words. "I've seen a lot of places in the galaxy, Your Highness. I've traded with dozens of species and learned their customs. One thing I've noticed is that the powerful rarely ask for help. They command it. You asked. That tells me something about your character." Zara was quiet for a long time, staring out at the stars. When she spoke again, her voice was soft. "My father taught me that true strength comes from understanding when you need help, not from pretending you never do." Admiral Skaroth has forgotten that lesson. The navigation computer chimed, indicating they were approaching the hyperspace jump point. Marcus began the final preparations for transition, checking and rechecking the calculations. A miscalculation at this stage could send them into the heart of a star or strand them in empty space far from any inhabited system. "Captain," Zara said urgently, "we have a problem." Marcus looked at his sensors and saw 3 Draconian warships dropping out of hyperspace directly ahead of them. They had positioned themselves perfectly to block the wandering star's escape route. Even worse, the 2 interceptors that had been following them were now accelerating to attack speed. "How did they know exactly where we would be?" Marcus muttered, his hands flying over the controls. "They didn't," Zara replied grimly. "They're blocking all the jump points out of the system. Admiral Skaroth has discovered my absence." The communications system crackled to life. "Captain Shun, this is Admiral Skaroth. You will return Princess Zara to the fleet immediately. Any attempt to flee will result in the destruction of your vessel." Marcus looked at Zara, who was studying the tactical display with the intensity of a trained military officer. "Your Highness, I'm open to suggestions. My ship isn't armed, and we can't outrun military vessels." Zara's scales had shifted to a deep metallic blue that Marcus was beginning to recognize as her thinking color. "Captain, how much do you know about asteroid mining operations?" Marcus frowned at the apparent change of subject. "Quite a bit. I've hauled equipment and supplies to mining operations across the galaxy." "Why?" "Because I have an idea, but it will require very precise flying. Are you willing to trust me?" Marcus looked at the warships closing in on them from 3 directions. His choices seemed to be surrender Princess Zara and probably face execution for kidnapping or try whatever desperate plan she had conceived. It was not really a choice at all. Tell me what you need, he said. Zara pointed to a cluster of asteroids off their starboard side. That mining operation was abandoned years ago, but the tunnels and processing chambers are still there. If we can reach them before the warships close the net, we might be able to hide long enough to implement a more permanent solution. The Wandering Star isn't designed for asteroid navigation, Marcus warned. Those tunnels were built for small mining pods. I know, Zara said. That is why this will require very precise flying. Marcus plotted a course for the asteroid cluster, his hands steady despite the racing of his heart. The Wandering Star was not agile, but she was responsive, and he knew every quirk of her maneuvering systems. If there was a pilot in the galaxy who could thread a cargo hauler through mining tunnels, it was probably him. The ship shuddered as the first interceptor opened fire, energy beams scorching the space just behind them. Marcus threw the Wandering Star into a series of evasive maneuvers that would have been impossible in a larger vessel. The old girl groaned and complained, but she held together. There, Zara pointed to what looked like just another chunk of rock. The main entrance tunnel is on the far side. Marcus saw it now, a dark opening that looked barely wider than his ship. He had threaded tighter spaces before, but never while under fire from military vessels. The interceptors were closing fast, and the larger warships were moving to surround the entire asteroid cluster. Hold on, Marcus warned, and dove toward the tunnel entrance. The Wandering Star plunged into the asteroid like a bullet entering a wound. The tunnel walls flashed past the viewports, so close that Marcus could see individual tool marks where miners had carved away the rock. Behind them, the tunnel mouth flared with the light of energy weapons as the interceptors tried to follow. The tunnel branched ahead, splitting into 3 directions. Marcus chose the middle passage purely on instinct, trusting his years of experience flying in tight spaces. The ship's hull scraped against rock protrusions, sending vibrations through the deck, but they were still flying. Left at the next junction, Zara called out, somehow reading a map that existed only in her memory. Marcus banked hard left, feeling the ship's structure strain against forces it was never designed to handle. They burst into a vast chamber carved out of the asteroid's heart, big enough to hold a dozen ships their size. Ancient mining equipment sat abandoned in the darkness, illuminated only by the Wandering Star's external lights. This will do, Zara announced. Shut down all systems except life support. We need to minimize our energy signature. Marcus powered down the engines and most of the ship systems, leaving only the essential life support equipment running. The sudden silence was almost deafening after hours of constant engine noise. In the darkness of the asteroid, lit only by emergency lighting, they waited. The sound of Draconian search ships echoed through the tunnels, their sensors probing for any sign of the fugitive vessel. Marcus held his breath as the sounds grew closer, then gradually faded as the search moved to other parts of the asteroid cluster. They will not search long, Zara whispered. Admiral Skaroff believes that no ship could navigate these tunnels and survive. He will assume we were destroyed when we attempted to enter. Were we almost destroyed? Marcus asked. Zara's laugh was like silver bells in the darkness. Captain, there were several moments when I was not entirely certain we would survive. Your flying skills are even better than your reputation suggested. They sat in the dark chamber for what felt like hours, listening to the distant sounds of the search growing fainter and fainter. Finally, Zara announced that it was safe to restart the ship's systems. Now comes the difficult part, she said as the lights came back on. We need to leave this system without being detected, and we need to do it in a way that convinces Admiral Skaroff that we died in the asteroid field. Marcus was beginning to understand why Princess Zara had chosen him for this mission. She needed someone who could fly a ship through impossible spaces and think creatively about problems that had no obvious solutions. 27 years of independent trading had given him both skills in abundance. I have an idea, he said slowly, but you're not going to like it. Over the next hour, Marcus explained his plan. It involved using the asteroid's abandoned mining equipment to create a controlled explosion that would simulate the destruction of their ship, while they escaped through a series of maintenance tunnels that connected to a different part of the asteroid cluster. From there, they could reach a smuggler's route that would take them out of the system undetected. Zara listened carefully, asking technical questions that showed she understood both the plan's brilliance and its dangers. When he finished explaining, she was quiet for a long time. Captain Shun, she said finally, Your plan requires us to create an explosion large enough to convince military sensors that our ship was destroyed, while we are still inside the asteroid. The margin for error is essentially zero. That's correct, Marcus agreed. But it's also the only way to make Admiral Skaroff believe we're dead. If he thinks we escaped, he'll never stop hunting us. Zara's scales had shifted to that deep blue color again. Marcus was learning to recognize it as the color of someone making a decision that could mean life or death. Very well, Captain, she said at last. But if we survive this, I am doubling your fee. As Marcus began preparations for the most dangerous gambit of his career, he found himself thinking that retirement was looking more like an impossible dream. But then he looked at Princess Zara, saw the determination and courage in her eyes, and realized that maybe impossible dreams were worth fighting for after all. The abandoned mining equipment hummed to life around them, preparing to create the very convincing death of Captain Marcus Chun and his ship. If everything went according to plan, they would be reborn on the other side of the asteroid field as ghosts seeking justice across the stars. The explosion that marked the supposed death of Captain Marcus Chun and Princess Zura was visible from 3 star systems away. Ancient fusion charges, originally designed to break apart asteroid cores for easier mining, had been rigged to detonate in a spectacular display that left a debris field convincing enough to fool even military-grade sensors. Marcus watched the fireball bloom behind them through the Wandering Star's rear cameras as they emerged from a maintenance tunnel on the far side of the asteroid cluster. Chunks of genuine ship debris, mixed with asteroid fragments and carefully planted pieces of the Wandering Star's outer hull plating, created a debris signature that should satisfy even the most thorough investigation. Admiral Skaroff will be pleased, Princess Zara observed, studying the sensor readings. 2 problems eliminated with 1 explosion. Let's hope he's satisfied enough not to look too closely, Marcus replied, adjusting their course toward the outer system. They were now running on minimal power, their hull configured to absorb rather than reflect sensor beams. To any passing ship, they would appear to be just another piece of space debris drifting through the void. The next 18 hours were among the most nerve-wracking of Marcus's career. They had to cross half the Zirian system to reach the smuggler's route that would take them to neutral space, and they had to do it while appearing to be a dead chunk of metal. Every time a Draconian patrol ship appeared on their sensors, Marcus felt his heart skip a beat. Princess Zara proved to be an ideal companion during the tense journey. She was calm under pressure, knowledgeable about Draconian military procedures, and surprisingly good company. Marcus found himself learning about Draconian culture and history from someone who had lived it rather than just studied it. My people were not always warriors, she told him as they drifted past the Draconian patrol without being detected. Before we learned to travel between stars, we were scholars and artists. Our greatest achievements were in mathematics and music, not conquest. What changed? Marcus asked. Zara's scales shifted to a darker shade. The color Marcus was beginning to associate with sadness. We encountered other species who saw our strength and our technology as threats to be eliminated. We learned that in a galaxy where might makes right, survival requires strength. Perhaps we learned that lesson too well. They reached the smuggler's route without being detected, a hidden corridor of space that took advantage of sensor shadows created by gravitational anomalies. Marcus had used similar routes before when carrying cargo that various governments preferred not to know about. The route would add days to their journey, but it would get them to neutral space without leaving a trail that Admiral Skaroff could follow. As soon as they were safely in hyperspace, Marcus began making modifications to the Wandering Star's appearance and transponder codes. By the time they emerged in the Freeport system 3 days later, the ship that had belonged to Captain Marcus Chun was now registered to Captain Michael Torres, complete with documentation that would pass all but the most thorough inspections. Freeport was exactly what its name suggested, a space station that welcomed anyone willing to pay the docking fees and follow the minimal local laws. It orbited a brown dwarf star in unclaimed space, serving as a neutral meeting ground for traders, smugglers, diplomats, and refugees from across the galaxy. If there was anywhere in known space where a Draconian princess and a human captain could disappear, it was Freeport. They docked without incident, and Marcus was relieved to see the usual mix of species and ship types that characterized neutral stations. Nobody looked twice at a battered cargo hauler or its occupants. Princess Zara had used some sort of genetic modification device to alter her appearance, transforming her distinctive silver-blue scales to a more common bronze color that would not attract attention. "I need to contact my father," Zara explained as they made their way through the station's crowded corridors. "But first, I need to be certain that our communication cannot be intercepted by Admiral Scaritha's forces." Marcus led her to a secure communication booth that he had used before for sensitive business dealings. The booth was shielded against all known forms of electronic surveillance and operated on quantum-encrypted channels that were theoretically impossible to crack. "This is the best protection available outside of military installations," Marcus told her. "If your father has access to the draconian equivalent, your conversation should be completely secure." Princess Zara activated the booth systems and began the complex process of contacting the draconian Imperial Palace. Marcus waited outside, watching the constant flow of beings through the station's main concourse. Freeport never slept, never paused in its endless cycle of commerce and intrigue. 30 minutes later, Princess Zara emerged from the communication booth. Her scales had shifted to a color Marcus had never seen before, a deep purple shot through with threads of gold. He was beginning to understand that draconian emotional states were far more complex than human expressions. "I have spoken with my father," she announced. Admiral Scaritha's actions were unauthorized and directly contrary to the Emperor's explicit orders. A new fleet is being dispatched to relieve him of command and to attempt diplomatic resolution of the crisis he has created. Marcus felt a wave of relief wash over him. "So we succeeded? The war will end?" Zara's expression was troubled. "Perhaps. But Admiral Scaroth has many supporters in the military hierarchy. My father believes that some of them may attempt to prevent the relief fleet from reaching Zirian. There may be fighting between draconian forces before this is resolved." The implications of civil war within the Draconian Empire were staggering. Such a conflict could destabilize the entire galaxy, drawing in other species and potentially lasting for decades. Marcus began to understand why Princess Zara's escape had been so critical. "What happens now?" he asked. "Now, Captain, you have fulfilled your contract magnificently, and it is time for your payment." Zara produced the crystalline device she had shown him before and began the process of transferring the promised credits to his account. 10 times the value of your cargo, as agreed." Marcus watched the numbers appear in his personal account with a sense of unreality. He had gone from facing poverty to being wealthier than he had ever imagined possible. The farm he had dreamed of was now a possibility, along with dozens of other dreams he had never dared to consider. "There is one additional matter," Princess Zara continued. "My father has asked me to remain in neutral space until the situation with Admiral Scaroth is resolved. It could be several months before it is safe for me to return to Draconian territory." Marcus looked at her carefully. "Are you asking me to extend our contract?" "I am asking if you would be willing to have a passenger for an extended period. I will pay all expenses plus a substantial fee for the inconvenience. I understand if you prefer to begin your retirement immediately." Marcus stared out through the observation windows at the ships coming and going from Freeport's docking bays. The wandering star was out there among them, ready to take him wherever he wanted to go. He could book passage back to Earth tomorrow and never have to worry about money again. But as he watched a sleek courier ship arrive from the direction of Draconian space, he found himself thinking about Admiral Scaroth and the 15 million beings who had died because they had asked for time to consider their surrender. He thought about the battle at Zirian and the Federation colonies that would fall if the war continued. He thought about Princess Zara, alone in exile while her people faced civil war. "Your Highness," he said slowly, "I have a counter-proposal." Zara tilted her head. A gesture he had learned indicated curiosity. "You need a place to stay while the situation resolves itself. I need something meaningful to do with the rest of my life. What if we became partners instead of captain and passenger?" "What do you mean?" Marcus gestured toward the flow of ships and people around them. Freeport is the crossroads of the galaxy. Information, cargo, and people flow through here from every corner of known space. If someone wanted to help refugees or carry messages between separated families or transport medical supplies to war zones, this would be the perfect base of operations. Zara's scales were shifting through colors Marcus had never seen before, creating patterns that seemed to flow like liquid light across her skin. "You are suggesting that we use your ship and my resources to engage in humanitarian work. Something like that. I've spent 27 years moving cargo for profit. Maybe it's time I move cargo for a better reason. Princess Zara was quiet for a long time, studying his face with those remarkable eyes. When she spoke, her voice was soft with something that might have been wonder. Captain Chun, I believe you may be the most unusual human I have ever encountered. Most beings, given the wealth you now possess, would seek comfort and pleasure. You are proposing to voluntarily return to the dangers of space travel in order to help strangers. Is that so unusual? Among my people, it would be considered either noble beyond measure or insane beyond hope. I am not certain which. Marcus laughed. Maybe both. But I've been thinking about what you said earlier about choices. Admiral Skaroth chose to follow orders blindly and commit atrocities. Your father chose to trust you with a mission that could prevent civil war. You chose to risk everything to do what was right. Now I get to choose what kind of person I want to be for the rest of my life. Zara's scales had settled into a warm golden color that Marcus somehow knew meant happiness. In that case, Captain, I would be honored to be your partner in this enterprise. But I have one condition. Name it. If we're to be partners, then we are equals. I will not be your passenger or your employer. I will be your co-captain, with equal say in our decisions and equal share in our risks. Marcus extended his hand in the human gesture of agreement. Partners, it is Captain Zara. She took his hand in hers, and Marcus was surprised by the warmth of her scaled skin. Partners, Captain Marcus. Now, shall we begin planning our first mission? They spent the next several hours in a Freeport cafe, discussing possibilities over strong coffee and alien pastries. Word was already spreading through the station's communication networks about the crisis in Draconian space, and the refugee ships that would soon be fleeing the conflict zones. As the station's day cycle shifted to evening, Marcus found himself looking across the table at his new partner with a sense of excitement he had not felt in years. Retirement could wait. There was work to do, and for the first time in his life, it was work that mattered for reasons beyond profit and survival. Princess Zara caught him staring and smiled. What are you thinking, Captain? I'm thinking, Marcus replied, that maybe getting my cargo seized was the best thing that ever happened to me. Outside the cafe's windows, the stars wheeled in their eternal dance, and somewhere among them, the wandering star waited to carry her crew toward whatever adventures the galaxy might offer. Marcus Chun had thought his journey was finished, but he was beginning to understand that it was only just beginning. The galaxy was vast and full of beings who needed help. He and Zara would do what they could to provide it, one ship, one mission, and one act of kindness at a time. It was not the retirement he had planned, but it was the life he had never dared to dream of. And in the back of his mind, Marcus wondered what other impossible things might become possible when humans and dragons work together toward a common goal. 3 months after their partnership began, Marcus and Zara had established themselves as the most reliable humanitarian transport service in neutral space. Their reputation had spread through the informal networks that connected refugees, aid organizations, and resistance movements across the galaxy. The Wandering Star had been modified with additional passenger compartments and medical facilities, transforming from a simple cargo hauler into a ship capable of carrying hope to the hopeless. Their current mission was typical of the work they had chosen. The mining colony of Kepler, 452C, had been caught between advancing Draconian forces and a Federation defensive line, leaving 30,000 civilians trapped in the crossfire. Both sides claimed to be protecting the colonists, but neither side was willing to guarantee safe passage for evacuation ships. That was where Marcus and Zara came in. The Federation blockade commander is being reasonable, Zara reported as she returned from a negotiation session via secure communication. Captain Rodriguez understands our humanitarian mission and will provide safe passage through her lines. The Draconian commander is being more difficult. Marcus was not surprised. They had learned that Admiral Scareth's rebellion had fractured the Draconian military. Some commanders remained loyal to the Emperor and supported diplomatic solutions, while others had joined Scareth's faction and favored aggressive expansion. Unfortunately, the commander at Kepler, 452C, belonged to the latter group. General Thane considers the evacuation of civilians to be interference with military operations. Zara continued, her scales showing the bronze coloration that Marcus had learned indicated frustration. He believes that forcing the colonists to remain will compel the Federation to withdraw rather than risk civilian casualties in a battle. And if the Federation doesn't withdraw, then 30,000 innocent people die in the crossfire, and General Thane considers that an acceptable price for strategic advantage. Marcus studied the tactical display showing the positions of both fleets around Kepler, 452c. The planet sat in the middle of a carefully maintained standoff, with neither side willing to make the first move that would trigger a battle. But standoffs could not last forever, and when this one collapsed, the civilians below would pay the price. There has to be a way to get those people out, Marcus said. What about diplomatic immunity? As a member of the Draconian royal family, don't you have the authority to order safe passage? Zara's laugh was bitter. General Thane has declared that my royal status was revoked when I allegedly died with you in the asteroid field. According to him, I am an imposter trying to trade on the name of a dead princess. It was a convenient fiction that allowed Draconian rebels to ignore Zara's legitimate authority while maintaining the pretense that they were not in open rebellion against the Emperor. Marcus had encountered similar legal fictions before in his trading career, usually when someone wanted to break a contract without admitting they were thieves. What if we don't ask for permission? Marcus suggested. Zara looked at him with those remarkable eyes that seemed to see straight through to his intentions. Captain, are you suggesting that we simply ignore both fleets and proceed with the evacuation? I'm suggesting that sometimes it's easier to get forgiveness than permission. The Wandering Star is a small ship. If we approach from the planet's night side and use the electromagnetic interference from the mining operations to mask our signature, we might be able to land before either fleet detects us. And then we load as many people as we can carry and get out before anyone can stop us. We'll have to make multiple trips, but if we move fast enough, we might be able to evacuate a significant portion of the population before the military commanders figure out what we're doing. Zara was quiet for several minutes, her scales cycling through colors that Marcus recognized as her decision-making process. Finally, they settled on the deep blue that meant determined resolve. Captain Marcus, what you are proposing is extremely dangerous. If either fleet decides that we are a threat, they could destroy us without warning. And if General Thane captures us, I doubt we would survive interrogation. I know, Marcus replied. But what's the alternative? We sit here and watch while 30,000 people die because two armies can't agree on how to kill each other efficiently. Zara's scales shifted to the warm gold color that Marcus had come to associate with pride and respect. In that case, partner, I believe we have an evacuation to conduct. But I have one request. What's that? If we are captured, I want you to claim that I forced you to participate. There is no reason for both of us to face execution for my family's political problems. Marcus snorted. Captain Zara, if you think I'm going to throw my partner under the proverbial transport, you don't know me as well as I thought. We're in this together, whatever happens. The approach to Kepler 452c required every bit of flying skill that Marcus had developed over his career. The planet's mining operations had created a complex electromagnetic environment that played havoc with sensors, but that same interference would hide their approach if he could navigate the invisible maze of radiation fields and gravitational anomalies. Zara proved to be an excellent co-pilot, her enhanced draconian senses able to detect patterns in the electromagnetic noise that human instruments could not resolve. Together, they threaded the Wandering Star through the sensor shadows until they were skimming the planet's atmosphere. The mining colony was built into the side of a mountain, its structures designed to withstand the massive extraction equipment that had carved wealth from the planet's crust for the past 50 years. As they approached the designated landing site, Marcus could see crowds of people gathered around the spaceport, their faces turned upward with desperate hope. The landing was rough but successful. As soon as the Wandering Star touched down, colonist leaders rushed aboard to coordinate the evacuation. Marcus had expected chaos, but the colonists had been planning for this moment since the fleets arrived. They had organized themselves into groups based on age and medical need, with priority given to children, the elderly, and the injured. We can take 200 people on the first trip, Marcus announced to the crowd gathered around his ship. Priority goes to families with young children and anyone who requires medical attention. The loading process was surprisingly orderly. The colonists had been miners and engineers, practical people who understood the importance of following procedures under pressure. Within an hour, the Wandering Star's passenger compartments were filled with grateful refugees, and They were lifting off for the first leg of their journey. The trip to Freeport normally took 6 hours, but with the ship packed far beyond its recommended capacity, Marcus had to reduce speed to avoid stressing the life support systems. The refugees bore the discomfort with quiet dignity, understanding that every minute of delay was a minute that their families and friends remained in danger. They delivered the first group of evacuees to refugee processing centers at Freeport, then immediately returned to Kepler, 452c for the second trip. By the time they made their third approach to the planet, Marcus was beginning to believe they might actually succeed in evacuating a significant portion of the population. That was when General Thane's patience ran out. Unknown vessel approaching Kepler, 452c. This is the Draconian warship Flame of Conquest, came the communication as they entered the planet's atmosphere. You will abort your landing immediately and present yourself for inspection. Marcus exchanged glances with Zara. They could try to run, but a cargo hauler had no chance of outrunning a military interceptor. They could try to hide among the mining installations, but General Thane knew they were there now and would eventually find them. This is Captain Torres of the independent vessel Star Wanderer, Marcus replied, using their current false identity. We are conducting a humanitarian evacuation mission under the authority of the Galactic Refugee Protection Act. There are no authorized evacuation missions in this system. General Thane's voice crackled back. You will land at the military installation and submit to immediate inspection, or you will be destroyed. Zara activated a private communication channel to Marcus. He's bluffing about destroying us. General Thane cannot afford to attack a ship engaged in refugee evacuation while the Federation fleet is watching. It would give them the excuse they need to attack under the humanitarian intervention protocols. What if he's not bluffing? Then, we find out whether your flying skills are good enough to dodge military-grade weapons while loaded with 200 civilians. Marcus made his decision. General Thane, we are proceeding with our humanitarian mission as authorized by interstellar law. We will not submit to inspection by military forces engaged in illegal blockade operations. The silence that followed lasted long enough for Marcus to wonder if he had just signed death warrants for everyone aboard the ship. Then, General Thane's voice returned, tight with barely controlled rage. Captain Torres, you have been warned. The consequences of your actions are on your own head. The Draconian interceptor that had been shadowing them accelerated away, returning to the main fleet. Marcus allowed himself to hope that they had called General Thane's bluff successfully. 20 minutes later, as they were loading the fourth group of evacuees, the surface-to-air missiles began falling like deadly rain around the spaceport. He's not trying to hit us, Zara observed with professional calm as explosions bloomed around the landing field. He's trying to damage the landing facilities enough to prevent further evacuation missions. She was right, but it was small comfort as chunks of the spaceport's infrastructure collapsed under the bombardment. Marcus accelerated the loading process, shouting for the refugees to move faster while trying to project a confidence he did not feel. Captain, called one of the colonist leaders, we're receiving a message from the Federation fleet. Admiral Rodriguez is demanding that the Draconian bombardment cease immediately. Marcus looked up at the sky where he could see the bright dots of warships maneuvering into attack positions. The standoff was collapsing, and when the shooting started in earnest, anyone on the planet's surface would be caught in the crossfire. How many more people are waiting for evacuation? He asked. About 15,000, the colonist leader replied. But at this rate, we'll never get them all off the planet before the battle starts. Marcus did some quick calculations in his head. The wandering star could carry 200 people per trip safely, maybe 300 in an emergency. Even if they could maintain their current pace, it would take dozens of trips to evacuate the remaining population. We need more ships, he said to Zara. Where are we going to find more ships willing to fly into an active war zone? Marcus thought about the dozens of contacts he had made during his trading career, the network of pilots and merchants who owed him favors or trusted his judgment. It was time to call in those debts. Captain Zara, how would you feel about organizing the largest unauthorized evacuation in galactic history? Zara's scales shifted to the brilliant silver-blue color that Marcus had first seen when she approached him in his cell aboard the Iron Talon. It was the color of someone embracing impossible odds with complete determination. Captain Marcus, she said with a smile that showed those slightly pointed teeth, I thought you would never ask. As explosions continued to light up the sky around them, Marcus began sending emergency messages to every pilot he knew who might be willing to risk their lives for strangers. The response was faster and more overwhelming than he had dared to hope. Within hours, ships began arriving from across neutral space. Cargo haulers like his own, passenger transports, even a few small warships whose captains had grown disgusted with the endless conflict. By the time the Federation and Draconian fleets finally engaged in the battle that everyone knew was coming, there were 47 ships on the planet's surface, loading refugees as fast as humanly possible while military-grade explosions lit up the horizon. It was, Marcus reflected as he piloted the Wandering Star through a debris field created by the destruction of a Draconian heavy cruiser, definitely not the quiet retirement he had originally planned. But watching the last transport ship lift off from Kepler 452c with the final group of evacuees, he could not bring himself to regret the choices that had led him to this moment. Princess Zura, co-captain of the most successful humanitarian operation in recent galactic history, sat beside him with scales that gleamed like captured starlight. Outside their viewports, 38 ships filled with grateful refugees followed them toward safety. Behind them, two fleets continued their deadly dance around an empty planet, fighting over mining installations that no longer mattered to anyone except the ghosts of abandoned machinery. Ahead lay Freeport, neutrality, and the promise of new missions for those brave enough to carry hope into the darkest corners of the galaxy. 6 months after the Kepler 452c evacuation, Marcus Chun found himself standing in the observation deck of Freeport Station, watching the most unusual diplomatic meeting in galactic history unfold before his eyes. The station's main docking bay had been converted into a neutral meeting ground where representatives from across the galaxy had gathered to witness what many believed would determine the course of interstellar relations for generations to come. The cause of this unprecedented gathering sat at a conference table in the center of the bay. Emperor Draconis himself, ruler of the mighty Draconian Empire, and Admiral Sarah Rodriguez of the Federation Fleet, along with ambassadors from 15 other major stellar nations. Between them sat Princess Zura, no longer hiding her identity or her royal status, serving as the mediator who had made this meeting possible. Hard to believe it all started with stolen crystals and a runaway princess, Marcus murmured to Captain Elena Vasquez, one of the pilots who had joined their evacuation fleet and stayed to help with subsequent humanitarian missions. Hard to believe a human cargo hauler and a dragon princess could change the course of galactic politics, Elena replied. But here we are. Marcus watched through the reinforced glass as his partner. He still thought of Zara that way, despite her return to diplomatic duties, gestured toward a holographic display showing star charts and territorial boundaries. The Kepler evacuation had been the turning point, the moment when public opinion across the galaxy shifted decisively against Admiral Scarith's aggressive expansion. When civilians from dozens of species had worked together to save 30,000 lives while two fleets fought over empty real estate, it had become impossible to ignore the cost of endless warfare. The rebellion within the Draconian military had collapsed shortly afterward, as commanders who had supported Scaroth found themselves isolated and facing courts-martial. Admiral Scaroth himself had died in the final battle, choosing to fight to the death rather than face the justice of the Emperor he had betrayed. Captain Chun, came a familiar voice behind him. Marcus turned to see Director Hamilton of the Galactic Refugee Assistance Organization approaching with a datapad in hand. I have those final reports you requested. Marcus accepted the pad and scrolled through the numbers that summarized 6 months of the most rewarding work of his life. Since partnering with Princess Zara, their growing fleet of volunteer ships had evacuated over 300,000 civilians from war zones, delivered medical supplies to 17 quarantine systems, and transported diplomatic envoys to negotiations that had prevented 4 separate conflicts from escalating to full warfare. Impressive numbers, Director Hamilton continued. The board of directors has asked me to make you a formal offer. We'd like you to head our new rapid response division, with full funding for a fleet of purpose-built humanitarian vessels. It was the kind of offer that Marcus would have found impossible to refuse just a year ago. Legitimate recognition, unlimited resources, and the chance to help people on a scale he had never imagined possible. But as he looked through the glass at Princess Zara mediating between galactic powers, he found himself thinking about smaller things. The personal touch that made the difference between bureaucratic aid distribution and genuine help. Thank you, Director, but I'm going to decline, Marcus said, handing back the data pad. What we've built here works because it's personal. The moment you try to make it official and bureaucratic, you lose the thing that makes it special. Director Hamilton looked disappointed, but not entirely surprised. I had to try, but I understand. What will you do next? Before Marcus could answer, a new voice joined the conversation. If I may interrupt, Princess Zura said, approaching from behind with that graceful movement that never failed to catch his attention. I believe Captain Chun and I have some unfinished business to discuss. Director Hamilton nodded politely to the princess and excused himself, leaving Marcus and Zara alone on the observation deck. Through the glass, they could see the diplomatic meeting continuing without her, though several ambassadors kept glancing toward the observation deck, as if wondering when their mediator would return. Shouldn't you be in there preventing galactic war? Marcus asked. Zara's scales displayed the warm gold color that Marcus had learned meant happiness and affection. The preliminary agreements are signed, and the details can be worked out by professional diplomats. My father no longer needs his daughter to clean up the mistakes of rebellious admirals. So what happens now? Do you return to the royal court and resume being a princess? Zara moved to stand beside him at the observation window, looking out at the ships coming and going from Freeport's docking bays. That is one option. My father has offered me a position as Special Ambassador for Humanitarian Affairs, with authority to negotiate directly with other species on refugee and aid issues. That sounds like important work. It is, Zara agreed, but it would be based on Draconis Prime, working within the imperial bureaucracy and attending formal diplomatic functions. All very proper and official, and she paused, searching for the right word. Boring. Marcus laughed. Princess, 6 months ago you called me unusual for preferring meaningful work to comfortable retirement. Now you're making the same choice. Perhaps you have been a bad influence on me, Captain Chun. They stood in comfortable silence for a few minutes, watching the eternal dance of commerce and diplomacy that defined places like Freeport. Finally, Zara spoke again. Marcus, I have a proposal for you. A different kind of partnership than what we discussed when this all began. Something in her tone made Marcus look at her more carefully. Her scales had shifted to colors he had never seen before, creating patterns that seemed to shimmer with nervous energy. What kind of partnership? Zara turned to face him fully, and Marcus saw something in her eyes that made his heart skip a beat. The kind where we stop pretending that we are merely business partners and acknowledge what we have become to each other. The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Marcus felt his carefully maintained emotional distance crumbling as he looked into those remarkable eyes that had seen straight through his defenses from the very beginning. Zara, I'm a middle-aged human cargo hauler with no education and no family name. You're a princess of the most powerful empire in the galaxy. There are probably laws against what you're suggesting. Zara stepped closer, and Marcus could smell the subtle spice scent that he had learned was uniquely hers. There are no laws against a former princess choosing her own path in life. And I choose to spend mine with a man who has shown me what true nobility looks like. What about the cultural differences? What about the practical problems? What about... Zara silenced his protest by placing one scaled finger gently against his lips. Marcus, for someone who has spent 6 months proving that impossible things are possible when people work together, you're being remarkably pessimistic. Marcus looked into her eyes and saw the same courage and determination that had led her to approach him in a cell aboard an enemy warship. The same strength that had carried her through asteroid tunnels and evacuation missions and diplomatic negotiations that would determine the fate of civilizations. Are you sure about this? He asked softly. I've never been more certain of anything in my life, Zara replied. The question is, are you willing to take one more risk with me? Marcus thought about the life he had planned before Admiral Skaroth seized his cargo. A quiet retirement, a small farm, growing tomatoes in peaceful solitude. It seemed like everything he wanted at the time. Now he thought about the life he had lived for the past 6 months. Dangerous missions that saved lives, growing friendships with pilots and aid workers from across the galaxy, and the constant companionship of someone who challenged him to be better than he had ever imagined possible. Princess Zura, he said formally, will you do me the honor of remaining aboard my ship? Permanently this time. Her answer was a smile that outshone the stars visible through the observation window. Captain Marcus Chun, I thought you would never ask. When they kissed, Marcus felt something settle into place that he had not even realized was missing. The loneliness that had driven him to spend decades alone in space was replaced by a sense of completion that he had never experienced before. "So what happens now?" Marcus asked when they separated. "Now we go back to work," Zara said practically. "There are always more people who need help, more conflicts to prevent, more impossible things that need to become possible. The only difference is that now we face them together, as partners in every sense of the word." Through the observation window, they could see the diplomatic meeting breaking up as representatives from across the galaxy shook hands and tentacles and other appendages in gestures of mutual agreement. The immediate crisis was over, but Marcus knew there would always be new crises, new challenges that required people willing to risk everything for strangers. "There is one thing I need to tell you," Zara said as they prepared to leave the observation deck. "My father has offered to make you an official citizen of the Draconian Empire, with a title and lands and all the traditional honors." Marcus raised an eyebrow. And I told him that Captain Marcus Chin already has the only title he needs, and that the Wandering Star is the only home he requires." They walked hand in hand through Freeport's corridors toward the docking bay where their ship waited. The Wandering Star had been refitted once again, this time with permanent modifications that would allow her to serve as both home and headquarters for their expanding humanitarian operations. "Do you ever regret it?" Zara asked as they passed the cafe where they had first planned their partnership. "Giving up your comfortable retirement for this life?" Marcus considered the question seriously. The life they had chosen was dangerous, uncertain, and would never offer the security he had once craved. But it was also filled with purpose, adventure, and the constant opportunity to make a difference in the lives of people who desperately needed help. "The only thing I regret," he said finally, "is that it took Admiral Skaroth stealing my cargo to make me realize what I really wanted out of life." As they boarded the Wandering Star, Marcus felt the familiar thrill of anticipation that came with the beginning of a new mission. Director Hamilton had left them with information about a colony ship stranded in disputed territory, its passengers caught between two territorial claims and running out of supplies. It would be dangerous work, requiring careful navigation of both political and spatial hazards. It was exactly the kind of impossible situation that Marcus and Zara had become specialists in resolving. Course plotted for the Centauri disputed zone. Marcus reported as he settled into the pilot's seat that had become as familiar as his own heartbeat. "All systems ready for departure," Zara confirmed from the co-pilot's position. "Emergency supplies loaded, medical facilities prepared, diplomatic credentials updated." "Then, let's go save some people," Marcus said, his hands moving over the controls with the ease of decades of practice. The Wandering Star lifted off from Freeport's docking bay and accelerated toward the hyperspace jump point, carrying her crew toward whatever adventures the galaxy might offer. Behind them, the diplomatic meetings would continue, and the formal agreements would be signed, and the bureaucratic machinery of interstellar relations would grind forward at its usual stately pace. But somewhere in disputed space, ordinary people faced extraordinary dangers, and they needed help that could not wait for official channels or proper authorizations. They needed someone willing to risk everything for strangers, to fly into danger for the simple reason that it was the right thing to do. They needed Captain Marcus Chun and Princess Zura, partners in every sense of the word, carrying hope across the stars in a ship that had become legend among those who needed legends most. As the Wandering Star disappeared into hyperspace, Marcus reflected on the strange journey that had brought him to this moment. He had believed his adventure was finished, that nothing remained but a quiet retirement and peaceful obscurity. Instead, he had found love, purpose, and a future bright with possibilities he had never dared to imagine. The galaxy was vast and full of people who needed help. He and Zara would do what they could to provide it, one ship, one mission, and one act of courage at a time. It was not the ending he had planned for his story. It was something far better, a new beginning that would last for the rest of their lives, however long the stars might shine.